First of all, Stanley, it's great to be here, and I really appreciate being included, especially with Billy Weeks and Robin Rain Nelson, two personal heroes of mine, with the kinds of stories that they do. And what you just said, Stanley, was kind of how I feel. I feel like each one of us comes at our stories from a different perspective. So it's really nice to see how Robin. But the thing is, I do think the thing that we have in common is that we all get very personally connected with people that we photograph and that we do our stories with. Do you have the little clicker? Where's the clicker?
It may need to be replugged out of his laptop.
Oh, okay. So I'm just going to run Robin's show again because I like that one a lot. Show some of those. The really funny thing about this, when Billy, a couple of things that Robin and Billy said really connected with me because they held true for me too. So this morning, I waited until this morning to really put mine together. Billy Weeks' wife came downstairs and said, "Now, Billy, you've got to start with something funny." So, this is supposed to be about words and images. So there was never anybody better at creating images in your mind with words than Charles Dickens. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And then I'm thinking how to illustrate that with images. And you get my friend's granddaughter, May, who I think did a pretty good job. I started out as a writer. I started out as a reporter. And then I got kind of tired of taking all those notes and everything, and I saw the photography coming in and out, and they were taking pictures and getting out of there real quick, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be a photographer. I was working for a paper that had very little vetting sort of skills, so I said, I want to be a photographer, and they said, okay. And I got my camera, and then the next day I was the photographer for the paper. But that turned out to be a really fortuitous thing for me, and ever since I've tried to find ways to use words and images together. So I have kind of a double-edged career. I do to make my living, to make money, to pay my bills. I do a lot of marketing for schools, and I'm going to go back. I love the way that words can give you a visual. And I want to show you a piece that a friend of mine, Michael David Murphy, does. I recommend you check out his blog, Unphotographable, where he talks about the photographs that he didn't take, that he didn't have a camera for, or he didn't take. Some of them are profound and as visual as anything you'll ever see in a picture. So I'm just going to show you one from his website. This is a picture I did not take of a live cartridge from a .44 Magnum resting in the litter-strewn grass outside of McDonald's at dusk. The bullet sitting there quietly, just to the right of my foot, while I photographed a neighborhood anti-crime rally in the dying light. Yeah, that's pretty good. Words and images. They both have power, and they both can work alone or together. And what I found is using them together is where the sweet spot is for me. I've been working on a sort of a project where I'm going back into the 80s to photographs I took then. It's a memoir of that time. It's a visual memoir of that time, and I'm trying to capture the images in words, but not the images, but the emotion, the feeling that I had while I was there. So I'm just going to read a couple of those. This was for a project that I was doing on the homeless in Atlanta. Veterans of war, some real, others imagined. Neglect, abuse, alcoholism, mental illness, bankruptcy, subprime mortgages, emotions, evictions, despair, bad choices, and the accumulation of uncaring families and communities end up on the streets in Atlanta. Perhaps they find peace on cold nights in one of the myriad churches, nonprofits, and missions serving an ever-growing homeless population. This image was taken in the Union Mission 25 years ago. The math that brought him there has remained the same, and a steady stream of others have replaced him. We don't know their names and avoid their faces as we hurry past upturned palms seeking a small degree of solace in a handful of spare change. Some of you might recognize these two gentlemen. Louis Grizzard, who was a columnist for the Atlanta paper and a good old boy if ever there was one, and Hosea Williams, who was a civil rights hero who had sort of, he was a larger-than-life character, and he started a program called Hosea's Feed the Homeless, which still feeds thousands of people in Atlanta. Before they died, I was lucky to photograph these two Southern icons. One who paid homage to the heart of white Southern provincialism, the other to civil rights when doing so meant putting your life on the line. They were an unlikely pair and had never met before I brought them together, but they instantly recognized a soulmate when they saw one and bonded immediately. Louis Grizzard showed up first and was ready to leave when Hosea Williams finally pulled up in his Cadillac, arriving late and coming from the wrong direction. I rented an old truck as a prop, and they filled the back, although Hosea got the biggest chair. Perfectly dressed for their parts, Louis sans socks and Hosea in bib overalls, they dropped their swagger for a snapshot and it was over, both going their separate ways to spout their wisdom in opposite directions. This is Leslie. Over 6 feet tall before putting on stiletto heels, Leslie was the perfect woman. The gender she inhabited part-time while dancing and vamping at Illusion, the drag show bar in Atlanta. My college roommate, when we moved to Atlanta and moved together, he ended up coming out right when we, pretty much the year that we got to Atlanta. And he started dating a dancer in the review at Illusions. And so he would take me with him and we'd go backstage and I met all the dancers. Apple pie. The face could have been a cheerleader, queen of the prom, your first crush, all-American apple pie with a smile. A Georgia peach of a girl, ready for the next dance, but for the white cotton, symbolizing everything opposite the look she gave me as I clicked the shutter. I used to do a lot of street photography, and I enjoyed it, but I never felt like I had a purpose for those images. I'm pulling them all together now, but when I was doing it, I was questioning. It's Robin's question, the why. I didn't really have a good answer for that, other than the fact that I was exploring, and the camera was my ticket to go into places like the dressing room at Illusions and into a Klan rally. But it wasn't satisfying me. I wanted more. I wanted more out of what I was doing, and I wanted to basically find the answer to that question that Robin asked. I started working with nonprofits, and I've done a lot of work with the CDC and CARE and the Carter Center. And I was on an assignment with the CDC in Kenya, in Western Kenya, where I met Juliana Otieno, the doctor there caring for this child. And I spent a couple of days on rounds with Juliana. The hospital that she was the only pediatrician in the hospital, had no running water. They were constantly, thieves would go into and break into the water line, the water pipes coming into the town, and when they did that, it would leave them without water. So she's working in a hospital without running water and caring for these children in a way that was profound to me. It felt like I was getting an inner light into Mother Teresa. This was that kind of moment for me. And one of the things about the why, sometimes you don't know the why until later. And about 5 or so years later, I was given an opportunity to be a spotter for this faith-based award. They had 9 spotters spread out around the world, and I got to be the one in my little area. And they told me I could nominate somebody for this award, and it made me think of Juliana Otieno and the work that she did. And so I wrote, and this is an abridged part of my nomination. Juliana Otienna's life is a metaphor for the potential of Africa. Born in a small village, she combined a quick mind, stubborn nature, and compassionate heart into the drive to become a doctor. When I met her, she worked in the area where she grew up as the only pediatrician in the local hospital, a facility with little equipment and no running water. She is a lifeline to improve care in an area where 1 of every 5 children will die before they are 5 years old. If God's mission for us on earth is to serve, then she has done so under the harshest circumstances. She overcame the obstacles of a society that devalues women to become a pediatrician, and she returned to her home to use her skills in improving the lives of the impoverished. Dr. Juliana Otienna is a living testament to the power of faith. The battle she is fighting is one of biblical proportions, and she faces enemies of disease, pestilence, and ignorance with strength grounded in her Christian beliefs. She spreads that faith through her actions, touching each child, each family, and every challenge with hands that serve God. So that ended up being the highest compensated couple of paragraphs of words I've ever written. The organization that was giving this award sent a team to Kisumu and followed Juliana around for a week, looking at what she did, how she was helping people in her community, and the heart behind it all. And she didn't get the main prize, but she was one of 2 people that received the secondary award, which was $100,000. And when you're in a community where your hospital has no running water, that's some serious coin. And she took it home to Kenya. She put some of that to work in the hospital. She put some of it in her after-hours clinic, and she used some of it with her church. And Juliana Otienna became the Director General of the hospital. So I apologize. This was a meaningful moment for me, and this is part of the blessing of the kind of work that we all do. And like Billy said, there's a lot of power to having a photograph and telling a story, and you never know where it's going to lead. It's Robin's family that all of a sudden found hope and a new life, and it's Juliana Otienna who lived to see her potential realized and help her community, and all of those things happening because somebody saw them and gave a voice to them with a camera. She's very fond of me now. So in 1986, my dentist, who was a friend of mine, he was my age, he was hilarious. Left his practice as a dentist, and all I got was a letter saying that I was being referred to another dentist, and I didn't get it because Neil was this vital, really fun person. So I tried to reach out and find him, and it took me a while, but I finally did, and but he had already passed. He had AIDS. He was afraid that he would be rejected. He was a dentist, so he was afraid that his patients would be angry with him for which got blood and all that kind of stuff. That stuff never occurred to me. What occurred to me was here was somebody that died and wasn't able to rely on their friends and the compassion of people around them when they're at their lowest point, and they died alone. I got a letter from a friend of his that after he died saying that he had gotten the letters that I had sent to him, and that he just couldn't face anybody at the time. So I had an assignment at Grady Hospital, and I met this man, Ron. He's the first person that I met with AIDS. And Ron's story was Neil's. He had been a hospital administrator in Clayton County. He found out he had AIDS, and he left without telling anybody what was going on. So I had this idea it wasn't a new idea, it wasn't just mine. Jim Goldberg in San Francisco had done it with rich and poor people in San Francisco, and that had really affected me. where he had his subjects write with their own handwriting under the image, and I loved how that personalized everything. So I like to collaborate, and I felt like with each of these people that I photographed, it was a collaboration. And I would take the picture, and that they would say their words and have their say underneath the picture, whatever they wanted to write. So I would give them a pen, and I'd print the picture on an 11 by 14 sheet with the bottom of it blank, and tell them they could write whatever they wanted. So Ron said, "The nights are the hardest. Sometimes I'm afraid to go to sleep, afraid that I may not wake up. Going to my support group has helped me. I can talk more openly about my illness now, but I still have fears. I'm afraid I may die all alone. What's more frightening is that no one will care." Well, that was exactly the trajectory of what happened to my dentist, and in a sort of amazing way. I started working on this project when I had about 8 photographs. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a story on what I was doing. And they ran this picture of Ron as the lead image. And after it came out, I got a call from his colleagues that worked with him at the hospital. And they had not known what had happened to him. They didn't know any of this was going on. And asked me if I would put him in touch with Ron. So I called Ron and I said, your friends have seen this and they want to be in contact with me. And he said that was okay. So I put him in touch with him. And what they did was to become Ron's hospice. And they started visiting him and took care of him until he died. So he got the love and caring at the end that my dentist didn't. And if nothing ever happened other than that in my career as a photographer, then I would feel good about the job I did. Today I read something at Yom Kippur services which helped me decide what to write here. Alas for those who cannot sing but die with all their music in them. As I go on living with AIDS, I want to keep singing and hope that friends will continue to hear me, even when the song is a sad one. This is James. James, I photographed James, and I would give them the picture. I didn't give them any deadline. I told them they could write whatever they wanted and just get in touch with me when they had it done. So I didn't hear back from James, and I'd call him every once in a while and say, yeah, I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to do it. Don't worry. And that went on for a year. It was over a year between the time I took a picture of James and the time that he got the picture back to me. He said he called me and said I finally got it done. And I went and picked it up, and he said, it took me so long because I felt like I was writing my will. And that just really hit me because I knew that I felt like some people were going to write strong statements, but that some people maybe not such strong statements. But everything I was getting back was so intense, and I realized that that's the kind of seriousness that all these people were putting into it, that it might be the last thing they write. And the word epitaphs occurred to me. But then what I was experiencing with the people that I was photographing is that they weren't dying. It wasn't epitaphs for the dying. One of the people I photographed in Washington, Peter, called me to tell me that he was starting graduate school. He was dying of AIDS, and he was starting graduate school. These people were living. So the title, Epitaphs for the Living, came from those experiences. And sometimes there are no words. This is baby T. I photographed her at Grady. She died 2 weeks later. I asked the doctor what she needed, and he said she needs a walk in the park. And we put her handprint on the photograph. I have to keep dreaming blue skies, confronting the darkened cloud, building sandcastles, withstanding the beating waves, overcoming imminent ills, opposing the dreaded dragon, concluding happy ever after, crowning the victorious end. When I got his picture back, I immediately knew this was the closing picture in the book. Sequencing and telling those stories, how you put that all together can change the emotional arc of a story. So I felt like that was the perfect conclusion. This is Dee. Dee called me, and when he found out I was working on this project, he wanted to be a part of it, but he didn't want to be revealed, so he said, could I just write something for your book? And I said, well, you know, Dee, I'm a photographer, and this is a photography book. And he said, well, you know, I've got something to say. And I said, well, I think we can work something out. So I went over to his room, his apartment, and we talked about it for a while. He showed me some of his options for clothing, and he had this turtleneck, and this idea came up. We kind of came up with this together. And then he wrote about having to be anonymous when he wasn't anonymous, when he wanted to be out, but he was afraid of the repercussions and the stigma at this time in the world. Well, over the course of the next 2 decades or 3 after I took this picture, 18 of the people that I photographed died by the time the book came out. It took me about 18 months to complete all the work for the book, and by the time the book came out, 18 people died. And I want to give a shout out to Southern Methodist University Press, a Baptist University press that decided to publish this book and rushed it ahead of other books in their list, because they shared with me the immediacy of getting it into the hands of the people that I photographed. And I'll give another shout out to Lucinda Bunnan, who bought a copy of the book for every person that I photographed so that they could have a copy of the book. There's a lot of support out there for projects, and that's one of the things I do. My career is taking photographs for schools and their admissions materials, and I take pictures of corporate sorts of marketing materials. I just finished a project that took me over 1.5 years, photographing 900 attorneys. Whew. And so I do that kind of thing to make a living, and then I look for support for projects that are close to my heart, that are the things that I want to express and I want to say with my work. And it gives me a certain amount of freedom, that I'm not doing these as assignments, I'm doing them as projects that I control, and that's important to me. This is Doug now. A few years ago I got a call from a friend, and she said that she had had lunch with this guy, and my name had come up, and he said, oh, he took a picture of me for a book. And it was Doug. And this was after I thought every single person I photographed had died. And it was like a ghost walking back into my life when I saw Doug again. And now he's out and proud and embraces his life and his diagnosis. And as you can see, is a happy person. And I had an opportunity. I showed this work with the Smithsonian at their Folklife Festival on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and they contacted Doug and flew him out to be with me while we were there for 3 days. And it was a touchstone to all of the people that I lost. So one of the gifts that all those people that I photographed gave me was a direction, and that direction was that I wanted to find other ways to tell people stories that had health or poverty-related issues, and find ways to collaborate with them, because that was so meaningful to me. And so I did a project on kids with cancer at Eggleston, and I worked with an art therapist, so I would take a photograph of somebody. There's Jared. And Jared was a Godzilla freak. Jared loved Godzilla. And so the art therapist worked with him to express how he felt about having cancer, and he drew this picture of Godzilla burning down the hospital, because he hated the hospital, because anytime he went to the hospital it was awful. So that's Jared Faust, who survived and does these amazing illustrations of what? Godzilla. You know what? I have to get one of his recent pictures of Godzilla to put in there. This is Amanda. She was 14. She lost all her hair. Just at a time when you're a young girl and blossoming into womanhood, and your hair is part of your power and your self, and she lost it all, so she's depressed. She's sitting in her bedroom with her Mickey Mouse phone, and she did a piece of art that was a collage of all the stuff she hated to see in the hospital. She said, I never want to see this stuff again. The American Cancer Society decided 8 years after I did this project to publish it as a book. And I wanted to publish it as a book when I did it, but the thing was that wasn't the right time to do it. And sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to work out, because it allowed me to go back and find all the kids that I'd photographed 8 years later. About 8 of them at the time had passed, but I photographed 25 people, so that left me a lot of people to go visit, one of which was Amanda. And I photographed her now 22 years old with beautiful hair and her 2 kids. And, well, I'm an emotional person. You might pick up on that a little bit, but this was a very emotional moment for me. That's Grace. So I did a project on people that are visually impaired, and I'm bringing these up because it's about communicating and how you tell your stories in different ways. You can collaborate, different ways you can use words and images. So Annie is blind. I photographed her with a 4x5 camera, and then my wife did. We talked to her and about exactly what she sees, and what we found through this project was most people that are blind have a visual experience. And so Annie described this low contrast kind of vision, that things were all palettes of soft color and blur. And this is what you might see looking through Annie's eyes if you were looking at a woman sitting on a bench by the Chattahoochee River. That's how Annie might experience it. So my wife did the illustrations. She would study their visual issues and talk to them personally about how they saw things, and then she would do an illustration so that you could get an experience of what it would be like to see through their eyes. So it's trying to communicate that. And then I interviewed everybody, and I wrote small stories about their lives to go along with it. This is Cliff. He was a police officer in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, who was run over in the line of duty by somebody that had called in a domestic abuse call. Cliff and his partner were interviewing the man, and the woman had driven off, and when she saw them with her partner, she ran over him, and it caused him traumatic brain injury. And he was pretty much completely blind, but the fascinating thing was he developed Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is an amazing thing, where your brain basically continues to produce images in your mind, even though you can't see. And he described them just amazingly as these cartoon-like hands and arms and legs and noses and eyeballs all in a scrum, floating across this black field with shadows and green shrubs. And so a shout out to my wife Laurie Schock, who painted that and then put it on that background. And his wife saw it and said, that's exactly how he describes what he sees. And then I had the opportunity I had a Rosalind Carter Fellowship in Mental Health Journalism, and it allowed me to go into the lives of some teens and young adults who had a mental health diagnosis and had participated in their own recovery. And it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had, to be led into the stories of these people. This is Sarah, who tried on multiple occasions to kill herself, and said, beauty, being pretty doesn't save you from having a mental illness. Being a great athlete doesn't save you. It can seriously affect anyone, and a lot of people don't realize that. So I photographed them, and I interviewed them and told their stories and did short videos on most of them. And, this is Gordon. The best way I can describe my depression is that my brain hates how I am, either through bad wiring or misfiring neurons that hate me. They were intense stories, and these were really courageous people to both share them and to fight for their own survival, basically. I'm going to go, I'm probably over my time limit, but I did St. Andrews Presbyterian College, where I went to school, was the first barrier-free campus in the United States. Before the ADA came around, we had ramps and access to places that other schools didn't have. And as a result of that, 15% of our population had some kind of physical disability, which led to some lifelong friendships that I wouldn't have had otherwise, and I'm really thankful for. And so when the Paralympic Games were coming to Atlanta, Maggie Holzberg, a folklorist, and I applied to get funding for the Cultural Paralympiad, and I took photographs, and Maggie did interviews of people that had disabilities. This is Lauren McDevitt, now Lauren McDevitt Howard, not related. And she went completely paralyzed from the waist down when she was 12 years old from a virus. And within a month, she was in a therapeutic riding program. At the Paralympics, she won a bronze medal for dressage, and that's her and her horse Skip. This is David Sampson, who has cerebral palsy, and he is a really remarkable artist. And I won't say that he's an artist with a disability. He's just an artist. He said that he started doing art because he couldn't climb trees. I do some work with nonprofits and have traveled to Africa and Asia a few times. This is a story documenting the eradication of guinea worm disease. And that photograph I like because it's 90 meters down and 5 kilometers into a South African coal mine, which became the darkest place. There's no night that I've ever been in that was as dark as it was at that spot. And they wouldn't let me take a flash because they said because of the gases down there, they don't want you. And I said, fine, I'm not taking a flash. And so I would have to point my headlamp at people, and I would have other people down there point their headlamps. It was the only way you could get a picture. So I was just trying to get a sense of the scene down below the earth. And I always like to bring things back to my wife from my trips, and she got a just really gorgeous lump of coal from my trip there. Just some photos. I'm going to leave you with this last thing. So my wife both writes and produces and designs books, and if I'm lucky, I get to do some photographs for them. So she just finished writing the history of camp in Sapphire Valley, North Carolina for girls. It's turned 100 years old, and it was one of the leading camps in starting the camping movement in the United States, and the woman that started it was a remarkable person. And instead of making it Camp Hiawatha or Camp some Native American name and having kids run around in headdresses, she based her camp's theme on the search for the Holy Grail and King Arthur's Round Table and the search for yourself. And they called the search for that self, Follow the Gleam. And the gleam is the reflection coming off of the gold of the Holy Grail, the chalice that is the Holy Grail. So they talk about following the gleam. So I was hired by my wife to take some photographs for the camp, and one of them I wanted to do was a star trail. And a star trail is a series of images that you stack on top of each other to capture the swirling of the stars. And if you have the North Star, if you're lucky enough to have the North Star in your picture, everything circles around it. And so I went out to the camp I started this photograph at 8 o'clock at night. It was a full moon, so that's what's lighting the camp. That's Old Ball, and I got a pointer. These are the cabins over here. And I set up my camera, and I had a little device that would take the exposures. It's like a 3-minute exposure, stops for a couple of seconds to write it, takes another 3-second exposure, and then you stack them all together and you get the swirl of the stars. And this picture took from 8 o'clock at night to 1 o'clock in the morning, and once I clicked the button and started it, I got nothing to do. And I knew I was going to have nothing to do, so I did bring, it was cold, I might have had a bottle of Irish whiskey. So about halfway through this 5-hour odyssey, I was thinking about King Arthur, the Round Table, Guinevere, and all of that, and this was the words that came to me while I was doing that, and which my wife put into a double truck spread there and made it look all medieval. Follow the gleam. A vestige of stars swirled above wooden cabins, fortresses filled with angels tucked tight in their bunks. Dreams of Arthur and Guinevere filled the night as the pole star stood sentry and Orion twirled like a dervish. Awake at first light and disguised as girls, the angels, released from their heavenly spell, spilled into the day. A flickering luminescence dappled their path, song and laughter their shield, as they followed the footsteps of angels before, following the gleam. That's my show.